Hey, welcome to the channel. This week I'll be tackling the ceiling in our den room, some box beams and some cypress tongue and groove. I really wanted to give it a focal point that kind of elevates the room, gives it like a warm kind of rustic feel, with a little bit of architectural interest. The total ceiling is about 100 square feet. It's about 12 by 8, at least the area that I'm doing. My initial plan was to keep it under $200. I made a few mistakes along the way. Overall, it was right around $300 or so. So I will mostly be working on my garage floor using pretty basic tools. All right, anyway, let's do this. So this is what I'm working with now. There's the bookcase door I did a video on. I marked all my studs, where all my rafters are. The idea is to put a beam there, and then do tongue and groove cypress across the middle. When we built the house, initially in the building plans was just a flat ceiling in here, and we decided to do a tray ceiling, but it needs something. It's just a little bit too bland looking. I bought a new tool for this project, a laser measuring tape. I'm still not quite sure about it. Just don't trust the accuracy of it. I always go back and double check with my tape measure. Now, I looked at some of the box beams online. They ranged anywhere between like $200 and $400. And I thought I could definitely do it cheaper than that. And so here, if I use a 1x12, 12-foot piece of common pine, I could make one beam, ripping it down into 3 pieces. But then I took a stroll over to the thicker material, the 2x stuff, and it was significantly cheaper for the same length of material, about half the price of what it would have cost me for the 1x stuff. So I bought some of that to try and see if I could actually build these beams out of the thicker material. Unfortunately, I don't have the proper tools for doing that kind of cut. The setup I have is just not strong enough to get through that 2-inch material. Ideally, I'd like to have like a Festool track saw or something like that. This is what I'm using now. It's the Kreg AccuCut track. I bought the extended track so I could cut longer pieces over 8 feet. It's great for ripping large sheets of plywood down and thinner pieces of wood, but it just couldn't get through, at least my saw couldn't get through this thick 2-inch material. It wobbled on me. So it's back to the drawing board. I'm going to use the 1x12s. And I use this foam to cut the wood on. It just makes it a little bit easier. So I spent $40 on this. Not the greatest piece of wood, that's for sure. At least it'll be rustic. So this is what I got. On a miter and miter, that gives me a 6-inch beam with the sides being about 2.5, and then I only have to make 2 cuts. So when I'm measuring on this thing, I'm measuring from my edge all the way, not the plastic piece, but I'm measuring to the metal so that it's consistent all the way down. So the measurement I made earlier from the edge to the metal, I just repeat it, and that way I get the exact same cut on both sides. All right, so it's a few weeks later. Finally got around to putting these beams together. I'm joining the 2 mitered edges, seeing that I've got some pretty big gaps where my blade kind of went squirrely on me. Another reason why, it's nice to have like a Festool track saw where you don't have that much variation in your cut. So I was just gonna require more wood filler than I would like, but I can't waste any more wood on this project. So the best tape that I found when trying to secure this joint is just this regular packing tape. It holds the wood pretty good and allows the glue to dry. Got my tape running long ways and then this way. This is the tricky part, trying to flip it over. So the tape just acts as a clamp when you do your glue up and put your nails in. And sorry for the noise, I have some hawks that are nesting in the oak trees above my garage. There There's your beam. Cut some 4.5 inch spacers so that I can clamp this shut while I nail it. Close it up. All right, so now I'm using 2-inch 18 gauge brad nails to hold it. So I had a couple nails come through on me. Just got to snip them, wood putty. I'm gonna peel the tape off now so that I can wipe all the excess glue, because otherwise it's gonna be a pain later. So ideally I would have liked to use pin nails, and then I would have had less work filling holes and doing all that, but there's no way. These cuts were so bad on the corners that there's no way the pin nails would have held it together. So a little more extra work. A lot of my tools are Harbor Freight. I'm very much not a professional. I mean, the results show that, but it does show that anyone can really do this kind of stuff. You don't need a big expensive shop with expensive tools. It just takes maybe a little bit more patience, but you can get, you know, a nice look for cheap. See, some of these gaps are pretty big. That one's about 1/8 of an inch. But I'm gonna go in with spackle, fill all this in, sand it all down, give it a nice kind of rounded edge, and then you won't even be able to tell that it's 2 pieces of wood. This is what I use here. It's a lightweight spackle, and it takes stain pretty good, and it's cheap. So I'm gonna let that dry overnight and give it a good sanding tomorrow. Tonight I'm gonna research a little bit how to do white oak finish. Obviously I know it's not gonna be white oak, but try to get a similar kind of look. Do a little bit of YouTube research tonight, see what I can come up with. All right, next day here. Stuff's pretty dry. I'm gonna come in with, start with 100 grit and then work down to 220. Get it nice and smooth. Then I think I'm gonna whitewash it, white paint with water. And then do maybe like a Jacobean stain or some kind of light walnut. So this pre-stained wood conditioner step I probably didn't need to do since I ended up doing the whitewash, but it may have helped a little bit, just kind of keep the splotchiness down. I got a little bit left here. I'm trying to salvage what I can. So my ratio here was about 1 part paint to about 5 parts water. Almost immediately starts to dry. And it was drying pretty quick, so I had to move pretty fast. So I think the idea here, using the white paint first, is just to remove some of those yellow undertones. So when you apply your stain, you get more of a true stain color. I don't know. That's just my theory on it. So there's definitely a noticeable difference between the two. It removes a lot of that yellow tone. So I took this Jacobean and mixed it with water so it would just run a little more. This was an oil-based stain, so mixing with water was probably not a great idea. Probably could have skipped that part. But anyway, I got the look I was kind of going for. So there's a before and after with the stain. You can actually see some splotchiness there where I didn't do a good job sanding. I don't know if that's the glue or the wood filler. I think overall I achieved the look I was kind of going for. Also, you can see where the spackling is. It took the stain really well, so it looks exactly like wood. Looks like one cohesive piece all the way around. And then I cut a few pieces of 2x4 as my mounts for the beams. I purposely made the beams a little bit long so that I could get a perfect fit by just going back and cutting them into size. So it's a little long. I'm going to attempt to shorten it by maybe, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch. We'll see. Alright, so at least doing it this way ensures a nice tight fit, even if it is a little more work. I'm running back and forth. Let's see what we got. That's what we got. There's a little bit of a gap in the corners, but that's going to be covered with the cedar, so you're not going to see it. So these beams weren't very heavy, so I really wasn't too worried about just having the 2 blocks holding them up, especially since I used a few deck screws into the studs. Oh, so close. There we go. This knotty cedar is really not bad for the money, and it matches the pine really well. Got some leftover 1/4 inch. I'm gonna cut strips and use that to mount the tongue and groove to these little like fairing strips. Take a picture.
Come on. 3, 2, 1.
Oh, missed it. I used a few screws and then mostly nails just to mount it to the studs. Alright, so I got all my fairing strips. The wood, the cypress is super thin, like super thin, paper thin. So I'm just going to use pin nails. I think that should be enough. I've been letting it acclimate to the house for a little while. I think what I'm going to do is just grab a piece. I'll grab one from a different packet because they do have a little bit of variation in color. Some are darker. That's the plan. Let's go. So there's the gap. This stuff is so thin, but at least it's easy to hang because it's not heavy. So I'm gonna need a notch around the vent. This stuff is so thin, I'm gonna use my oscillating tool to notch out around. All right, so we got the vent. Now another tricky thing is gonna be getting around these lights. The easiest way I found to make these cuts around the lights is to cut a 45 on the miter saw. Then just a bunch of notches with the oscillating tool. I did try to use a jigsaw. Unfortunately, it just kind of split the wood because it's so thin. So I found the easiest way to get these cuts was to just make a lot of notches. So for this piece here, I just nailed it first and then I just cut it in place. It was a lot easier to do it that way. Was a little bit of a tricky area here.
You did cut that close.
Last piece. Little sliver. I really like the look of just the cedar. It just doesn't match the beams, so I'm gonna go through and just stain all the ceiling. So this is the finish I went with. This is a water-based stain, so I did mix it with about 3 parts of water because it goes on almost like paint. This was the test piece, and I got it to match pretty well to the beams. So, a little advice, don't stain a ceiling when it's on the ceiling. That was a lot of work, man. My neck is killing me. But as it dries, it's starting to dry a little bit lighter. That looks pretty good. Definitely matches the beams now. I got some pretty big gaps, so I'm gonna caulk. So it's not really doing what I wanted it to do, so I think I'm gonna skip this part. I did really like the pine, but it was a little bit too cabin-y, country looking. So this gives us more of like a coastal look, which makes sense because we are in Florida and we do have coconut trees outside.